Hello world, Dano here, stacking paper as always. And today we got not a weird one, but I don't even really know how I'm gonna go about doing this because it's not really a review as much as it is me gushing about this. So this is Dangerous Visions, which is a anthology of science fiction short stories from 1967, edited by Harlan Ellison. Now, what makes this one different than a lot of other anthologies is most anthologies collect stories from, the past, but it could be like any range of years. Some of the stories could be more recent, some of them could be like 5 or 6 years old, right? Because there's themed anthologies and stuff like that. What's unique about this anthology is every story in here was only written for this anthology. And he went out of his way to curate the authors. Like, he approached every author and said, hey, I want you to write a story for me for this anthology. And it's going to be like a perfect encapsulation of this year, 1967, and like the changing of the guard of science fiction. So every one of these stories was never printed before this book. So it really is kind of like the vanguard of the new wave of science fiction, because the lineup of authors in this anthology is fucking insane. It's actually like mind-boggling, the people he got to write for this. Like Lester Del Rey, Robert Silverberg, Frederick Pohl, Philip Jose Farmer, Harlan Ellison himself, Brian W. Aldiss, Philip K. Dick, Fritz Leiber, Paul Anderson, Damon Knight, Theodore Sturgeon, Chris Neville, Ari Lafferty, J.G. Ballard, John Brunner, Keith Laumer, Norman Spinrad, Roger Zelazny, Samuel R. Delaney. Now, to someone who hasn't read much, I guess, new wave sci-fi, you probably don't know most of those. But these are like massive names. And what's cool about it is like some of these guys are more established. Guys like Zelazny, like Lafferty. But some of them, or like PKD is a great example. But some of them are like kind of just getting their career started. But Harlan, he saw the diamond in the rough and went, yeah, this guy, get him. So like Delaney at this point had only done a few novels. Spinrad too was pretty young, I think, when this came out. But it's hard for me to rank this book because it's not one story, but it feels like a 10 out of 10. Although it's a little odd for me because I kind of read this book over the course of 2 years. So maybe I should have done it in a more solidified chunk, because it's like I read a bunch and then I stopped. And then a year ago I went on vacation, read a bunch more, and then stopped. And now I'm only just finishing it now. So there's some stories that I don't really remember all that well. Ursats, Go Go Go, The Happy Breed. Like, I don't remember these ones that well. But the ones I do remember are some of the best short stories I've ever read. Like, some of my favorite examples. Okay, David R. Bunch. Never heard of this guy before, so I didn't mention him in my little list off there. But for some reason, he got 2 stories in a row. And Ellison says, and actually, wow, sidetrack, but another thing I really love about this is every single story has an introduction by Harlan Ellison, and it's really just him talking about his relationship with the author and how he met them, what he thinks about them, and in a lot of the cases he's like taking the piss out of them. Ellison is a snide little fucker. He's really funny. And then you get an afterword with the author themselves kind of either explaining the story or maybe just kind of yapping about something else. So that's cool. You get that extra context. And also you get a really good introduction by Isaac Asimov. Asimov's not one of the authors here because he is kind of the old guard. He's like one of the big 3 of the classic era of science fiction, whereas these are all kind of like the new young guns. And Asimov is essentially saying like, yeah, I'm kind of washed up, but it's good to see the torch being passed. It's wholesome, and then him and Harlan are shitting on each other in their introductions. It's really funny. But anyways, so David R. Bunch, he wrote these 2 stories called Incident in Moderan and The Escaping, and they're both linked, and it's essentially about a world where nuclear apocalypse has already happened, and the few remaining humans are struggling to survive while all of these androids hide in bunkers and shoot nukes at each other, like as a game. They're treating it like for fun. Meanwhile, people are just like fucking dying gruesome deaths, either by getting exploded to pieces or just dying of radiation. And it's haunting. But reading this led me to find the Moderand novel written by Bunch, which combines a bunch of these stories. A lot of these authors, I ended up buying a bunch of their work just because I read their short story in here and said, holy shit. Silverberg, his short story, Flies, about this android that is like murdering all of this guy's ex-wives. Like, it's brutal. The PKD in here also might be better than the 2 PKD novels I've read, which is insane to say, because I've read Man in the High Castle and Ubik, but the story in here, Faith of Our Fathers, is like, it's so ahead of the curve, like, but it's so PKD, you know? It's about this dictator who's like rules, you know, the world with an iron fist, and it's about this guy who takes these drugs, and by doing that, he sees that this dictator is actually like an alien, and then he kind of gets wrapped up in this revolution to try and overthrow him. And it's like, it's really impressive how like much he's able to world build in such a short period of time. And a lot of these stories were either nominated or won Hugo Awards for that year. Gonna Roll the Bones by Fritz Leiber, a story about a guy playing craps with the devil. Really fucking awesome. But I think my personal favorites will be If All Men Were Brothers, Would You Let One Marry Your Sister by Theodore Sturgeon. What a fucking name that is. And without really getting into any spoilers, it's about this guy who's trying to find a planet that he knows he's been to. He's been to it in his past. But he can't find it recorded anywhere. He can't find any record of it. Doesn't matter which, like, library he goes to or like census station. They all claim that the planet he's talking about doesn't exist, and it's just going into his past, into like how he got there and why he's so desperate to find it. And it's really unnerving. It's like, a lot of these books are really stories are really uncomfortable to read, but that's what makes it new wave. That's what makes this like the perfect encapsulation of new wave of science fiction, because a lot of it does deal with space and, like, you know, sci-fi concepts about the future, but most of it deals with inner space. It deals with the mind and how it affects you. Like Tested Destruction by Keith Laumer, maybe it's recency bias because I read it like last week, but another really fucking weird story, but so interesting. It's about a guy who is trying to, again, very similar to Faith of Our Fathers, trying to overthrow a dictator government, but he gets captured and interrogated, and during this interrogation, they strap him to a chair that just kind of like fries his brain. But while that's happening, an alien hive mind is also tapping into his brain at the same time. So you get this back and forth of he's trying to fight two different like mental barrages at the same time, and they intertwine with each other, and it gets so absurd but really good. The Zelazny in here, I'll be honest, wasn't that great, which is weird because Zelazny is one of my favorite writers, but it's funny. It's about a luchador, but instead of a bull, it's a car, and I think he's some kind of robot, and he's just like the bull charges at him, and he, like, you know, rips out the radiator or like smashes the window when it comes past him. Like, it's kind of cool, but it's just kind of whatever. The Prowler in the City at the Edge of the World by Harlan Ellison's story actually got adapted into a Star Trek episode, I believe. And it's about Jack the Ripper, who gets sent into the far future, into the far edge of the galaxy, into a city that is like, it's like stainless steel and everyone's robots, and it's kind of like this robo-utopia, and he's just really fucking confused. One more that I'll leave with. The J.G. Ballard in here, this is the first Ballard I read, which is interesting because I'm going to read Crash later this year. But The Recognition, definitely a weird one. I'm not sure how I feel about that one, but What else? Oh, I gotta say the Philip Jose Farmer. So this is probably the most polarizing one. It's the longest story by far because it's not even a short story. It's a full-on novella that's just in this book, and it's called Riders of the Purple Wage. It's a play on words for Riders of the Purple Sage, which I think is a western. And the Purple Wage is basically UBI, and it's about a world where most people don't work. The kids who go to school are learning about like these abstract, like everyone is like a performance artist. But people kind of live in their houses and they stay hooked up to VR, and there's a form of it explains a form of the internet, like a really early idea of the internet, and how people can connect to each other and just get absorbed, essentially brain rotting. It's crazy. It's brain rot in 1967. But it gets into this like really incestuous territory that, again, extremely uncomfortable to read and very polarizing. But the thought experiments are they're just there. And what I think this anthology is perfect for is, if the only thing you know about science fiction is Dune and Star Wars and essentially just like heroes' journeys in space, or like Sword and Planet, that kind of stuff, if that's all you think science fiction can be, this is the book for you, because it just shows you that science fiction is so much wider than people give it credit for, and it can really delve into these concepts that I think no other genre really can. And for that, yeah, I think this is just a 10 out of 10 anthology, even though there's some in here that like I think are kind of mid. The big ones, the really important ones, are so good that it just completely compensates for any type of low point that's in this. It's just an absolutely insane lineup, and I think if you're a fan of science fiction, you are missing out on something if you don't pick this up. But anyway, that's my not even review, I guess, gushing about how good this anthology is, and I hope it inspires at least one person to read it. So until next time, take it easy.